Good afternoon and welcome to November's edition of the live Q&A episode of the Never Taught to Lift podcast. For anyone who's not familiar, my name is Chris. I'm a physiotherapist and I'm here today to try and answer any questions that you might have about starting strength training as an older adult. Whether you're just getting started, whether you've been doing it for a bit and you just want to progress, I'm here to answer any questions relating to that. So if you are watching this live on YouTube, you do have a question for me, then you can use the chat feature and that will come up to me on screen, and then I will be able to try and answer that live. If I feel like I need a little bit more research before I can answer that confidently, then I'll certainly acknowledge the question, and I'll come back to that in next month's Q&A session. So they are on the first Wednesday of every month at midday, and that's UK time. If you are watching this afterwards, then it's still possible to ask questions. Just leave it in the comments of the YouTube video or send me an email. So it's chris@nevertoldtolift.com, and I will answer that again in next month's episode. And the same is if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, then again, in the same way, either jump over to YouTube and leave a comment there, or you can send me an email. And as a reminder, chris@nevertooldtolift.com. Great, but before we get into let me just bring this up. Before we get into the first question, I wanted to share a little bit of information that's come to light on a research paper that has been really insightful. So this was on a post from Adam Meekins, who is the sports physio on most social media. One that I really wanted to come on and talk about. So thanks, Adam, for making me aware of this. But what this is it's a paper where they took approximately 70,000 adults aged 40 to 79, and they reviewed their wearable device data. So whether that's Garmin, Fitbit, anything along those lines. And they were looking at the number of minutes of aerobic activity, so whether it's moderate or vigorous. And they followed them up over an 8-year period and had a look at the incidence of diabetes, dementia, cancers, any kind of all-cause mortality, and wanted to see what the patterns were there. And it came up with some really good information that challenges slightly the World Health Organization and their physical activity guidelines, or at least it adds a bit more light to it and gives you a little bit more guidance of what you can do to meet those. So for anyone who's watched me for a while, you'll know I talk about these a lot. These are the targets that you should be aiming for better health going into the future. So they break it down into your aerobic minutes, and then it's also muscle strengthening sessions. So if we go into the aerobic minutes, and this is the World Health Organization's physical activity guidelines, they say that we should be doing at least 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise, and they kind of give a range of 150 to 300 minutes, but the minimum there is 150 minutes per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to know exactly how do I know if I'm doing moderate intensity exercise or if I'm doing vigorous intensity exercise. And as a general rule of thumb, you want to have an increased work of breathing. But if you're still able to maintain a conversation, you're in the moderate zone. If you would struggle to string a sentence together, you're in the vigorous intensity exercise. And as a result, the World Health Organization are saying that you only need to do 1 minute of vigorous exercise to be the equivalent of 2 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. And that's the important bit that I'm going to come back to. In terms of the muscle strengthening, you can see that on the right there. They're saying that adults, and what they're referring there is 18 to 64, should be doing at least 2 sessions per week of muscle strengthening activities. And older adults, 65 and over, should be doing at least 3 sessions of activity that improves strength and balance. So they've kind of added the balance side of things in there. but they recognise that older adults need to be doing more rather than less, which challenges a lot of people's thinking. I'm going to leave that to the side for a minute and focus a little bit more on these vigorous intensity minutes. Before coming to the results, I wanted to sort of talk about the research there, because obviously it's a little bit vague and subjective to say, could I string a sentence together, or am I out of breath? So they're a little bit more, the values they pick are a bit more scientific, and they use a value called a MET, which is the metabolic equivalent of task. Now, which sounds a bit of a mouthful, so I'll try and explain it a little bit more. So 1 MET is the energy expenditure that you would use just at rest when you're not doing anything. So this is your resting metabolic rate, or commonly known as basal metabolic rate, or BMR. Any tasks that you do will then need more energy expenditure. And what they've done is they've then related that back to that 1 MET, what you would be burning or using at rest. So moderate intensity exercise then is then classed as 3 to 6 METs, whereas vigorous intensity exercise is anything is over 6 METs is classed then as vigorous, and then under 3 is low intensity exercise. And again, that still doesn't really paint much of a picture there. So there's a really good article on Healthline, which I'm going to link to along with anything else I talk to in the comments underneath this video once I've finished. But they try and give some approximate, and it's clearly there's going to be some nuances in it, but it gives you a bit of an idea, but some approximate METs, so equivalents of task to that resting metabolic rate. So I've just picked out a couple, there's more on the table, but if we look at walking, that is at a slow pace, they give that 2 METs. Yoga also gives you 2 METs. And we need to remember some of these things will be challenging, but it's very much the aerobic part we're looking at here. So yeah, yoga and very light, slow walking is 2 METs. They're in that low category. If we move up to this middle category, so remember 3 to 6 METs, some of the things they include in there is a brisk walks, that's 5 METs. Swimming at a leisurely pace is 6 METs. Weight training with heavier weights is 5 METs, whereas if you're only using light weights, it's 3.5 METs. So again, light weights alone only just get you into that moderate intensity, whereas the heavier weights bring you into well into it. So 5, we're just underneath the 6 there. And as a little side note, I always remind people that if you are doing weights, resistance training, strength training, sufficiently at an intensity to build strength, you are going to use those heavier weights in relation to what you're capable of. The great thing is the minutes you spend doing that are able to be included in the minutes that you're aiming for. So if you do 2 half-hour workouts, you've 60 minutes along the way to your 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. It's not that you have to do 150 minutes plus the 2 strength training sessions. The 2 strength training sessions, say, are included in the minutes you're doing. And then if we come on to the vigorous intensity exercise, they've used some things like circuit training is 8 METs. Then we've got singles tennis, they've given 8 METs. And then running, and they've used the speed here at 7 miles an hour, which I had a quick look. That's the same as an 8 minute per mile or 5 minutes 20 per kilometre. That's a bit of a guidance there. But they've given running 11.5 METs. So yeah, that's more just to give you a bit more of an idea now of what the METs were and what vigorous actually looks like in terms of the intensity that you're going to do when you're doing your exercise. But let's come on to then what then did this paper show, and why did I find it so interesting? Is, if I'm probably bring up the right one here. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger for a second so you can read it. But it says that we found 1 minute of vigorous intensity. We found 1 minute of vigorous intensity physical activity was equivalent of about 4 to 9 minutes of moderate intensity. And again, if we go back to what I said earlier, in the World Health Organization, they're saying 1 minute of vigorous is equivalent of 2 minutes of of moderate intensity. They say actually, by looking at the data, and this was only from October 2025, so last month this was published, they're now saying actually, when they've looked at all the data, 1 minute of vigorous is actually worth 4 to 9 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. So it's far more valuable than we once thought. So it all comes to your efficiency of time, because if we look at, say, the lower range of that and say it's worth 4 minutes of moderate, you now only need to do 37.5 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise to get your 150 minutes of moderate, or the equivalent of your 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. So it's really powerful to try and include some of the vigorous in there if you can and you feel confident to. But there's plenty of people recently that I've spoken to. There's Michelle Lyons, who's a menopause expert. She mentioned about doing 12 minutes or 2 12-minute sessions per week of high intensity training. That high intensity training fits you into vigorous. That's 24 minutes already. And again, we times that by 4. Can't do that in my head quick enough, but yeah, you're well along the way. And then if you've got your 2 strength training sessions of maybe 30 minutes each, you've got enough in there to meet the guidelines. You don't have to spend hours doing this, because a lot of people, it's the time that puts people off. So it's not discounting the moderate on its own and doing some of the things that included there, but it's just showing if you can add some vigorous minutes and really get your heart rate up and really feel out of breath for a bit, you're going to have less of an issue with some of those diseases we talked about. So it's really powerful. I think it's a really good bit of data there. So something I just wanted to share with you. And it does actually bring us nicely on to the first question I had, which was, I can only train once per week due to caring responsibilities. Is it worth bothering, or do I need to do it 2 sessions? And probably not surprised that my answer is absolutely great to be doing 1 session per week. And you're probably ahead of a lot of people if you do that. Doing anything is better than not doing anything. So if you can't meet the 2, a lot of people do that. They just say, well, if I can't meet the 2, there's no point doing it, so I'm not going to bother. Fitting in that 1 is going to start to make you feel more confident with the things you do. You'll feel more confident in the exercises. You'll feel like you're taking action, and it just puts you in a lot more positive mindset as well, and you probably feel stronger at the same time. Often once you've got that first session in there, you felt like you know what you're doing with the exercises. You don't have to spend too much time thinking about it, and it's not that mental block of stepping into the gym or your home gym and doing this. Then actually fitting in a second one suddenly becomes a lot easier, and it's often easier to find that time to fit it in. The other thing we haven't really mentioned is they never actually specify in the guidelines what a session is. Is it 20 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Has it got to be an hour? I normally say if you're aiming for 20, 30 minutes, that's great, but it doesn't have to be. So if you can only squeeze in a 15-minute workout here or there, then that is brilliant. I would go with that. Or I think it was episode 20, we had Steve on, and he introduced this concept of snacktivities, because he didn't have the time, or at least it was too daunting an idea to do bigger workouts and it actually feel like a workout. So he broke things down into, I'm just going to do 10 or 20 squats here, and then another time a day I'm going to hold some dumbbells and just do some shoulder press or things along those lines. And he would just fit things in from a minute here and a minute there. And again, those minutes add up, and there might be not enough in a row to really get the heart rate going, but you're still going to get some strength benefits and confidence from doing it. And again, as that confidence grows, it's a lot easier to kind of extend those minutes into 5-minute chunks and then 10-minute chunks. But yeah, I really like that idea. And he was the one that coined the name snacktivities. And if you can kind of get into that mindset, then that's certainly easier, because that's going to be easy to fit around your previous responsibilities. So again, that's that question. So next one came in this morning, and again, it's quite small there, so I'm just going to bring that up a little bit bigger to start with. So it says, hi, I have lost 36 pounds on Mounjaro GLP-1 injections. I did this to get weight off to take pressure off my arthritic hips, which has helped. However, I have also lost muscle. My hamstrings seem to be so weak. What is the best exercise to make them strong again? Or what is the best home exercise to make them strong again? Many thanks. So let's bring that smaller again. So I think firstly, congratulations. Losing that amount of weight is fantastic already, and even better that it achieved the goal that you wanted to achieve of making the arthritic hips more comfortable and less of an issue. So that's fantastic, and not surprising that you feel there's certain areas that are weak. And when you do lose a lot of weight in a quick period of time, you often do find that you lose muscle mass as well as the body fat that you're aiming for. And the fact you recognize that is a real positive, because a lot of people don't think of that side. They think it's all body fat, and they don't think they have to do anything else on top of that. It's not surprising that the weakness is there, because if you have painful arthritic hips, pain stops us wanting to use the area. We tend to do less, and therefore muscles decondition. Because they decondition, you're often left in an environment where the pain can get a little bit worse, and because it's worse, you want to do less again. And then if you're doing less, that's also where the weight can come up, and then there's more stress on the hip, like you found. So the fact that, say, you've managed to get the weight off the hip is brilliant. In terms of your question there specifically, yes, the hamstrings probably do feel weak. They're clearly not the only thing we'll have got weak. So as well as focusing on the hamstrings, and I will talk about hamstring exercises in a second, don't ignore all the other muscles around the hip and the legs, but also in the upper body. But generally it's the legs you're going to probably want to focus on a little bit more first. Do consider adding in a generalized program to try and target everything. But in terms of the hamstrings then, and the fact you've mentioned you want to do this at home rather than a gym, I would start with a couple of exercises. A bridge and a Romanian deadlift, or commonly called RDL, is a really good one. So again, I'm going to bring a video up on screen, and I'm going to try and do my best to describe it. So I'm just going to hide the question for a second there. So let me just fast forward, because that's the wrong one. So this was when I was doing squats. So there we go. So we're onto the bridge here. So I am laying on the floor with my knees bent to beyond 90 degrees, and my feet are flat on the floor, and then I'm just lifting my hips off the floor and up into the air. So I'm kind of going from a position where my hips are bent to an extended position where they're up in the air. Now this uses a combination of both your hamstrings and your glutes. And so really good for what we call the posterior chain, and it will help to strengthen some of the muscles around there. Now, the closer the heels are towards your bum, the more it focuses on the glutes and slightly less on the hamstrings. If you want to favour the hamstrings a little bit more, you want to position your feet a little bit further away from your bum. And that way, say, it puts your hips in a position, or your glutes in a position where they're not quite as efficient as they could be. So it then relies on the hamstrings to have to work a lot harder. So that is better. And then you can progress it even further, is you can actually lift your heels up and place them on maybe a bed or sofa or a step or a box. And with the heels raised, you can kind of dig your heels in to then lift your bum up in the air, and that targets the hamstrings a little bit more. If you wanted to progress further, whether it's on the box or whether you go back to the floor, you can try and do single legs. So you could hover one leg in the air and then just push through the remaining leg, and you've now doubled the weight effectively, or the force that's going through that leg. So again, the hamstrings are then getting challenged even more. So that's the first one I would do. The bridge is a great exercise. You don't need any equipment. You can go straight into that. Then the next one, and again, I'll bring this a bit bigger for the moment, is the Romanian deadlifts. So this is one, and you can see it from the front here and then from the side, but you're standing upright and you're trying to push your bum back and lean your back forwards. So you're hinging again at the hip, and you'll see my shins have stayed vertical, so there's not much happening at the knee. And again, I'm holding some dumbbells there. Initially, you could do it as if you were just mimicking holding dumbbells just to get the feeling of it. But again, as we progress, you do want to push the muscles to fatigue to get the strength in the hamstrings. A common thing that tends to happen is people, instead of keeping the shins vertical, tend to drift their knees forwards over their toes and kind of get an increased angle at the ankle. What that does, you're effectively then turning it into more of a squat rather than a hip hinge. So it is about pushing that bum back and getting the knees straight. And you'll notice there my back is relatively straight as well. So I'm trying not to curl my back either, because that then takes a lot of the pressure off the hamstrings. And if you get this movement right, you will feel when you're at the bottom of the movement, you'll feel a real stretch along both hamstrings there. And then that's going into the conventional deadlift, which we don't need necessarily quite so much. So they're the bridge and the Romanian deadlift. The other one that is really helpful for the hamstrings is like a hamstring curl. So that could be seated or laying on your front. Now, clearly you said you want to do this at home, so you won't have the fixed machines that you would maybe get in a gym, but a resistance band is really useful for that. So what you can get with a resistance band, and I should have got one to hand, but it's what we call a door anchor. So it's kind of foam stopper with a fabric loop that sticks out the end. And what you can do is put that either over the top, but here you're going to want to put it down the side of the door, shut the door, and then it blocks the foam stopper on one side of the door, and then you've got the fabric loop sticking out the other side of the door. And then you can loop in a resistance band to that. And then if you position your chair facing the door a little bit further away so that you can hook the band around the back of your heel or the back of your shoe, you can then sit and pull that heel in towards you and underneath the chair. And that will really focus the hamstring there. Equally, you could do it laying on your front, facing away from the door, and again, hook it onto you, and you're trying to go into a bent knee position. So you're trying to get your lower leg to effectively point towards the ceiling by pulling that heel against the resistance of the band towards you. And there's nothing else that can help other than that hamstring muscle there. So they're the three main ones I would use. For the last resistance band exercises, again, I'll link to it below afterwards. I've got a video that's got 10 resistance band exercises. So one of the ones that's included in there is the hamstring curl exercise. So yeah, I'll link to that below. But hopefully that kind of gives you a good idea of hamstring-based exercises. But like I say, don't ignore the rest of the leg muscles. I would include a squat in there. Ideally, a lunge-based exercise in there. And then you do want to look at some of the trunk. So you might do rotation of the body. And then also some upper body exercises in there. If that is all sounding quite new to you, you're not sure kind of which exercises within those movement patterns you want to do, or how many repetitions and sets that you actually should be aiming for, and then I do have a free ebook that you can download. So it's a nevertaughttolift.com/ebook. And that will guide you through all the theory you need to know in order how to build muscle strength, but also what exercises you might want to include and some variations based off, say, people, if you've got arthritis in a various joint or restriction around the shoulder. It tries to give you an idea of how you can adapt some of those exercises. You can actually do them rather than have to leave some out or find you keeping flared up after doing the exercises. So do take a look at that. And if you have any questions about that, then you can send me an email as well. So let's just hide that there. And then I've had a message from Sue come in, so I'm just going to bring that up on screen. So Sue says, I have at times reduced rotation in shoulders. What would support more flexibility in this area and develop strength? So hi Sue, thanks for the question. And yeah, this is fairly common, that the shoulder mobility then does limit your ability to do certain exercises, and even other exercises that aren't targeting the shoulder, like the squat. If we're trying to use a bar on your back, often people can't get their hand into the position to hold the bar comfortably, and it's the pain in the shoulder that stops them actually doing squats. So there's various ways around that, where you can have what we call a safety bar, where you get struts that sit forwards and you can hold those if your gym's lucky enough to have those in. If not, then there are weighted vests. You can do dumbbells down by your side. Some people use a hex bar that you step in and you can hold again down by your side, and they haven't got to rely on the mobility there. But clearly your question's a bit more about what you can do to help with the mobility of the shoulder and the flexibility of the shoulder and build some strength in around it. You may or may not have heard, there's a group of muscles called the rotator cuff muscles. So there's some really nice exercises you can do to try and work on those. Again, a lot of people, when they're trying to build the rotator cuff, they tend to do it with their arm by their side, and actually their pecs and their lats take over, and the rotator cuff isn't actually getting stronger or really getting isolated or worked as much. So sometimes having your arm out slightly at the side, so whether it's 90 degrees from the body, or sometimes that's not comfortable, so 45 degrees from the body. If I show you on this arm, it's probably easier. You're then going to try and I would be laying on my back here with my arm supported on the floor, is take my arm back behind me and then rotate it forwards and then down towards the floor. Again, if I'm not at 90 degrees, I might come at 45. So the angles are changing slightly, but my elbow stays at about 90 degrees, but the upper arm from my body stays about 45 degrees. But you can do that with as little as a half a kilo weight, a 1 kilogram weight, but that's a really nice one. You can also lay on your side with your arm by your side and then lift that up around you. Weight bearing for the shoulder is actually really beneficial for the rotator cuff. So actually doing some plank based positions, whether it's a full plank, you don't necessarily hold the plank, but just spending a little bit of time with your weight going through your arms at various angles is really nice for the shoulder. If you struggle with shoulder press because you can't get the arm vertically up and it's always slightly here, you're then not actually pressing forwards, you're just holding the weight upwards. So trying to recline yourself back a little bit more helps. So initially you could do chest press and you're still getting some press exercise where you're just laying on a bench or laying on the floor holding the weights and pushing them up towards the ceiling. If you've got a bench and you can set it at an angle, then again, if my body's slightly back, I can get to a vertical position, but without my arm having to be in the end of range. So I'm then working within the comfortable range of motion that you've got, or you're working in the range that you've got without causing aggravation and irritation there. The pull-based exercises, again, really good to build strength around the shoulder. So again, that could be with a resistance band or with the pulley machine at the gym. But again, I would work on, sat upright, I might hold the arms in front of me and I'm pulling them both in. I might do that on just single arm, so you're not pulling too much with one arm and just leaving the other one behind. But that gives a few ideas. It's quite difficult in this setting to really demonstrate those without having the space around me to kind of show you and get the exercises there. So if you do have any follow-up questions, you can either ask again here or do send me an email. So again, that's chris@nevertoldtolift.com. But yeah, no, thank you for that question. And just hide that there. So we've done the hamstrings. So next question that came in is, people keep telling me I should be focusing on gentle movement and that strength training is risky. How do I respond to this? And again, I thought this was a really timely question given what we talked about at the start in terms of the guidelines that we should be aiming for. And the two common or the two main things that came out of those guidelines, is that doing the things that people are often scared of doing are the things that are recommended that we should be doing. So, for example, it says we want to be doing more vigorous intensity exercise, and we want to do muscle strengthening that involves actually weight bearing with a sufficient load to actually build strength. And it often suggests we all should include some impact into that. Again, a lot of people, as we get older, the narrative in the past, but is still very prevalent today, is that you should probably stick with the low impact stuff that it isn't risky, it isn't dangerous. So maybe stick to just swimming and Pilates, or yoga. And again, I don't feel like I'm knocking those, because I think they're brilliant forms of exercise. But in terms of making sure we're meeting all the criteria we should be meeting, we need to be doing more than that. We can't just rely on those. And if we go back for some of those reasons why, is if we look at it just from the aerobic point of view, yoga was down at 2 METs. And remember, moderate needs to be 3 to 6 METs. So yoga and Pilates are very similar. Pilates wasn't a list, but I imagine it's, in terms of the aerobic challenge it gives you, it's going to be very similar to yoga. So already, if we're doing Pilates and relying on that, you're not doing enough to challenge your aerobic capacity. So you're going to be falling behind on that, because you're not actually meeting any of the minutes you need. So an hour of Pilates or yoga class doesn't actually meet the requirements for your minutes of aerobic activity. It then also isn't building muscle strength. It doesn't include any impact. So that is going to have a effect on your losing. The fact is, if you're not challenging it, you're losing muscle strength. If you're not adding impact or weight bearing with load, you're going to be losing bone density. So again, by just doing gentle, you can see how we're already falling into a trap of creating an environment where actually some of those age-related conditions are going to be more likely to occur and happen and potentially be more impactful. Whereas by doing the things that feel slightly scarier, so again, swimming will get you a little bit into that. So that was, remind myself, that was 6 METs. So we're crossing that boundary of almost being into the vigorous there. And if you increase the pace, because it was swimming at a leisurely pace, is 6 METs. Adding a few intervals where you do a minute of really hard swimming and then go back to your leisurely pace and go in a few more minutes of, or like minute intervals of doing the intense pace, you've got yourself into the vigorous intensity for a while there. So you're kind of flirting the edge with that. So again, and every minute you're in there, you've added 4 to 9 minutes of the moderate intensity exercise. What that is missing, the swimming though, is again, the muscle strengthening and the weight bearing with load and the impact. So we do want to make sure you're adding something else in, like strength training. And it's having that knowledge and knowing that the gentle movement is great to include. And I say, I don't want to stop people doing those forms of exercise, because as part of my physio treatment, for a lot of people, it's starting off with those forms of exercise. But we do want to build in those muscle strengthening and that vigorous intensity exercise into there. So it's kind of having that knowledge. Sharing a video like this might help, because a lot of time it's family members that are concerned and trying to be overprotective, which is natural. And I think I've used this example before of when my granddad or grandpa was in hospital having had a joint replacement. As having been a physio who works in wards where people have had them done, I used to get irritated at family members that kept doing everything for the person who just had the hip replacement done, because they need to do it for themselves to get stronger and gain confidence and more independence. However, when I was on the other side of it, I couldn't help but do everything for him, because I felt, you just feel like, because it's your loved one, you feel like you have to overprotect them. And if you're not sure and you haven't got the knowledge on things like this about strength training, the natural assumption is it's lots of heavy weights. There's a high chance of injury. So yeah, you try and protect your loved ones by trying to guide them down a path that might actually be worse for them. But yeah, I'm sort of waffling on a bit there. So, but that is my kind of take on that. And that brings us into one last question. So if you are watching this live, then again, please do use the chat feature to answer or ask me any questions, and I will try and answer that. If you are watching the replay, so again, you're still able to leave comments in the YouTube video or send me an email. So it's chris@nevertooldtolift.com, and I will include those in next month's Q&A session. If you are watching this live, I'd love it if you could just click the thumbs up button, and just do make sure you're subscribed to the channel to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. But yeah, for the last question, it was, should I do the same weight for all 3 sets or increase the weight after each set? So for most people who are just starting out, I tend to recommend that you do sort of 3 sets of each exercise. So a repetition is an individual repetition of, say, a squat. So you did 1 squat, that's 1 repetition. So if you do 5 in a row, that's 5 repetitions. If you then stopped, had a break, then did a second lot of 5 repetitions, you've just done 2 sets of 5 reps, or 2 sets of 5 repetitions. So the set is that group of repetitions, and each rep is the individual ones. So in the question here, they said, should I do the same weight for all 3 sets? So again, for people who are at the beginning stages, I tend to say yes, I would keep the weight the same for each set that you do. And again, as a reminder for anyone who's not 100% familiar with the intensity required for exercise or to build muscle strength, what we need to try and do is push your muscles to the point of muscular fatigue. And that is where muscle strength is built. So if you were doing, say, aiming for 12 repetitions, your 12th repetition should almost be the last one you could do. If you couldn't do any more, you can maybe have done 1 or 2 more, then we're close enough, you're going to build some strength. If you could quite happily done 5 more repetitions without having stopped, then you haven't used a sufficient enough weight. In which case I would say, yes, let's maybe up the weight for your second set there. But if you were close, then keep the weight the same. The second set is likely to be slightly harder, and the third set, again, it's going to be slightly harder again. So you'll be close to your 0 to 2 repetitions we call it repetitions in reserve. If I could have done 0, 1 or 2 more after I finished, I had that 0 to 2 repetitions in reserve. If you had that in the first set, you're definitely going to have that in the next 3, the remaining 2 sets. So yeah, I would keep the weight the same there. The other thing that's often important to know is I recommend, rather than necessarily aiming specifically for 12 repetitions, if that were the case at this point, I would say actually maybe aim for 8 to 12 repetitions. So if on that first set you did 12, you don't think you could have done another one, and then on the second set you only managed 11 and you tried the 12th and you just couldn't do it, and on the third set you hit fatigue at 9 repetitions and you couldn't manage the 10th one, don't be demoralized by that, because you stayed within that rep range of 8 to 12 repetitions, and every single one you reach muscular fatigue at. That is what we aim to do. That you've achieved the goal of the exercise of take every set to fatigue, and therefore we will build muscle strength as a result of doing that. If you felt your first one wasn't quite enough, but then you still hit fatigue on the second or third one, again, that's still fine. So if on every set you felt you had more than 2 repetitions in reserve, then that's where we do need to increase the weight. And I say, if you did that on your first set and your first set felt incredibly easy, then I would then increase the weight on the second and then potentially again on the third set. But that's the only time I would increase the weight. If you feel like you got the weight right in the first set, I'd just keep it the same. There is a little caveat to all of this, is if you're completely brand new, you don't really know what weight, so you've never really tried it before, I wouldn't aim for muscular fatigue straight away. I would get confident with the exercises first. I would start doing it with a little bit of weight and then gradually add a little bit more the next time. and that's probably the next workout, not necessarily the next set. And spend a bit of time getting used to the exercise before you get to that point where you reach muscular fatigue. And I would actually then start at 12 to 15 repetitions to reach muscular fatigue. And then over a few more weeks, you increase the weight again to get to 8 to 12. And then a bit more, we're looking at 5 to 8 repetitions. And the closer to 5 you get, that's where you really build the muscle strength. But you can still build some muscle strength within that 12 to 15. But yeah, as a minimum, I normally suggest about 12 weeks to get from having started doing the exercise for the first time to get anywhere close to that kind of 5 repetitions as the fatigue point. Once again, if you have any questions about that, or this all sounds a little bit daunting to you, then do take a look at that free ebook that I have. It's at nevertooldtolift.com/ebook. And that will guide you through setting up your first strength training program and going through the exercise selection, how you progress over time. And that should be, I think, really helpful for you. So that's a completely free download. Just go to the link there or have a look in the comments below. Or if you're listening to the audio podcast, do check out the show notes of this episode, which I'll put in the comment. I'll put that in the description of whatever podcast player you're listening to this on. You might also be interested in the course that I have. So it's Stronger for Life. So nevertooldtolift.com/course. That is the online course and community I have for people who want to take the next step. If the ebook has been useful, but you still hasn't given you the confidence to start, then I've got the online course, which is all video based. But the important part of it is you get a weekly group Zoom calls with myself. So if you hit a sticking point, or you want to update me on progress, or you want accountability from the rest of the really supportive community of people that have joined, then every week there is a group Zoom call where we can have those conversations and help get you back on track and just to help encourage others. So yeah, it's very much a community as well as a course. But if you're interested in that, then do take a look at that. So that's nevertooldtolift.com/course. But again, that will all be in the description in the show notes. But for now, I think that is everything. So the next one will be on the first Wednesday of December. I think off the top of my head, that's the 3rd of December at midday, and that's UK time, and that's GMT, because the clocks have now changed back again. But for now, we'll leave you to it, and please do send me any questions in advance of that next live Q&A. And I will include any questions that come in the next one. Great. Have a great day. Thanks.